Thank you very much, Rosalie. I'm going to just fill you in a bit about how we're going to proceed with the evening. And first I'm going to introduce everybody briefly, and then we'll have two presentations by our government folk, David Resnick and Charles McKinney. And then we're going to have a lively conversation, hopefully including everybody in the audience. I'll throw a few questions out to our panel of architects and landscape designers who are currently involved in parks and DDC projects. And then I hope you all join in right away with whatever questions you have, and I might even draw on your experience, because I understand about a third of you have worked for DDC in the parks. So without further ado, I'm going to give very brief introductions. David Resnick, immediately to my left, as Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Design and Construction. David heads the Structure Division, overseeing design and building for some 22 agencies involving $4 billion. I'll be asking him to name those 22 agencies at some point. These are the library, museum, police and firehouse, health, senior and daycare centers, and courthouse jobs that everybody wants. Before joining the DDC, David was at NYSHA working on its award-winning program to improve community facilities on public housing properties. An associate professor at NYU, David has also taught design studios and lectured at the University of Michigan, Helsinki University of Technology, Columbia, Pratt, Cooper Union, and many others. With an M.Arch from Cranbrook, completed in 1992, David is a licensed architect in New York and New Jersey. To his left is Charles McKinney, who in February, he was named Principal Urban Designer for the Parks Department, guiding the preparation for master plans for the city's flagship parks with an aim to reconcile changing community priorities and the new demands of sustainability. Currently, he's focusing on North Manhattan Park, including High Bridge, which I hope we'll hear a bit more about, because that's a new project that even I'm not so familiar with. For 4 years until 2009, Charles was the Chief of Design of Parks, overseeing just about every groundbreaking landscape that we're familiar with, from Fort Totten, Mill Pond Park, and ironically, 20 years ago, he prepared the Riverside Park master plan, and on Thursday, they are finally opening the missing link bikeway between 83rd and 91st Street, which is a nice full circle. With a B.Arch from the University of Arkansas and a master's in urban design from City College, David was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard in 1994.
Charles.
What did I say? I'm sorry.
I can't take credit for that.
It was a typo. Charles was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard in 1994. Jennifer Sage is a partner with Peter Coombs of Sage and Coombe Architects, which they founded together in 1995, and is dedicated to a full range of public and private projects. On the private side, they reconfigured the Noguchi Museum in 2 phases, and on the public, they have designed, among many others, 4 children's reading rooms for the New York Public Library, a marine firehouse for the FDNY, among others, for both DDC's Design Excellence Program and the Parks Department. So Jennifer has worked both sides of the fence. Jennifer attended Harvard College and the Yale School of Architecture, both at which she continues to teach. And she was a senior associate with Paycobb Freedom Partners for about 10 years, living in New York and Paris while teaching in Rome. How's that? Before setting out on establishing her own firm and coming back to New York. Thomas Balsley founded Thomas Balsley Associates in 1973, devoting it to a fusion of landscape and urbanism with an emphasis on the social and cultural over the decorative, well before that became rather fashionable. He has completed some 100 New York City parks, including Riverside Park South, Chelsea Waterside Park, and a park on 57th Street that was renamed Balsley Park. Tom continues to lecture and teach at Harvard, the National Building Museum, and Seoul National University, among many others. Scott Marble, on the farthest left, is a founding partner of Marble Fairbanks, which was established in 1990. Scott is also a faculty member at Columbia School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, where he lectures frequently on digital technologies and BIM. He is the Director of Fabrication Research and of a new Columbia initiative, the Intelligence Project, a 3-year research project exploring collaborations. With the MArch from Columbia and environmental design degree for Texas A&M, Scott has taught all over the country. So these brief descriptions by no means reflect the total of the energy and commitment to the public realm that all of these, our panelists, amply display. It isn't easy working for the city, but we'll hopefully find out tonight that it is some of the most gratifying and resourceful work around. Working for the city adds a few inches of stature as well as a few wrinkles of worry, but it also earns our ongoing respect and appreciation for all those who commit themselves to this work. So without further ado, we turn to David and his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, for the kind introduction, and I have to say I'm honored to be sharing the panel with my fellow panelists here, and it feels like a family reunion in many ways. I think there's many familiar faces here. I'm very happy to see all of you, and I'm going to share some history with you on the Design and Construction Excellence Program, talk a little bit about what the drivers were that brought it into being, and where we've come to so far since 2004. Many of you have seen this slide before, although I have to say we just updated it. And what you see here, for those who haven't heard me say this before, is we took our city GIS map and overlaid on it all of the projects that DDC has been responsible for managing since its inception in 1995-96, and then stripped away the map. And so what you're actually seeing there is just the projects, with the green dots being the building projects and the bluish lines being the roadway and sewer and water main projects. And as you can see, it starts to actually create the fabric of the city. And every once in a while I look at this and am struck by the kind of real awesome responsibility that we as a public agency and all of you as the designers of these projects have in actually shaping the cityscape. So I think it's actually an important thing for us, particularly in the city, to remind ourselves of. So just briefly, DDC is the city's public works agency. We manage the design and construction of all the public buildings, with the exception of a few building types. We do not do schools, as you know, and we do not do public housing or hospitals at this point. But pretty much other than that, we manage the design and construction portfolio of the operating agencies of the city. We have two main divisions. Our infrastructure division serves the Department of Environmental Protection, and DOT does all the roads, sewers, and water mains, and then the structures division, which does all the public buildings for the various agencies. I promise all the graphs and charts are going to be right at the front end of this presentation, so there's only a few. Just to give you a sense of volume, and I know there's obviously with good reason, there's concern over, where the city's capital program may be going given the budget situation, and certainly with what's going on in Albany, there is some reason to have that concern. The mayor announced the budget just last week, and I'm happy to say that the capital commitment remains strong. And actually what you can see here, which is good news, is that the red line, which indicates our commitments, which is registered contracts with the Comptroller's Office, is way up. And typically what happens is the payment curve will start to catch up with that over time. So our payments have been very constant, as you can see here, since 2005. It's been annually $4 to almost $500 million a year. That's actual work going in the ground, and to me that's the best metric. As you see this, that every one of those dollars is going directly to city services, new cultural facilities, libraries, you name it. So that's encouraging. As far as the portfolio that we have, and this is actually a pretty important slide to understand some of what I'm going to say later. The portfolio, if you look at it in terms of dollar amount, which is the pie on on the left, it consists primarily of public safety projects. You'll see there that the vast bulk of our work is in the Police Academy, the PSAC 2, which is the 911 call answering center, and the correctional portfolio. However, if you look at the number of projects, that's supposed to be number, not pound, although we did have a conversation about public buildings by the pound the other day, which was kind of an interesting thing. It shifts 180 degrees, and you can see that actually in terms of number of projects, our work is primarily culturals, libraries, and health facilities. So health clinics, small cultural institutions, public libraries, that's where the bulk of it is. And it takes us almost as much effort to manage a small project as it does a large one. So you can see that the vast bulk of the portfolio is there. And in fact, if you look at our portfolio across the board, what you see is of the billions of dollars that we've got, 75% of the projects are under $5 million and 90% are under $15 million. So there's a very high volume of relatively small public works projects. Most of what I'm going to say now has to do with the structures portfolio, the public buildings, which is the group that I run, and I will make a few references to infrastructure as we go, but that distinction, that the character of the portfolio is very important because it really goes to what drove this initiative in the first place, which was, if you go back historically and you look at how DDC delivered its capital programs, the bigger, more high-profile projects did get adequate attention paid to design. There was care taken in selecting the consultants and managing the design process and things which are obviously very high profile and exposed civic works that were out in the public realm, things like Flushing Library and so forth. However, where it was not as successful was for the vast bulk of the smaller projects. And what wound up happening often is that the consultant selection process and the design management process became very much driven by schedule and budget considerations. And in fact, the performance metrics really only could address those things which were considered measurable, and therefore institutionally it became very difficult to keep design at the table along with schedule and budget. So the what that we were building became less important than the fact that it was on time and on budget. And working to counter that was a very difficult thing to do sort of institutionally. In 2004, there was a coming together of the right group of people at the right moment in time, and an initiative was launched called this Design and Construction Excellence Initiative at that time, which was a pilot program. The pilot program announced by Mayor Bloomberg, the main goals of which you see here, great design for all public works projects, large and small, to engage a broader range of established and emerging professionals in the design community, and to put design on an equal footing with schedule and budget as a prime driver for public projects. And just real quickly, I'd like to read two quotes from the letter that the mayor wrote that announced this initiative. First is, I am a firm believer that excellence in design has a tremendously positive impact on our city, our fellow citizens, and our quality of life, as well as great economic benefit. And then that sort of opened the letter, and then at the closing of the letter, he said, our public works program should reflect New York City's status as a world-class city with projects that embody the highest standards in contemporary architectural and engineering design while respecting our city's historical context. So that kind of laid out what the charge was in sort of sweeping terms. And the initiative itself was broken into several areas of consideration. There were design and construction, explicitly design and construction initiatives, which were primarily procurement innovations. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but the procurement innovations was really, I think, the cornerstone of this initiative, in that it changed the way that we hired professionals for design services using qualification-based selection. Then there were budget process enhancements, which have been a bit more of a challenge, which we'll talk about, and partnering in construction, and evaluation, which was really just an assessment of the pilot to see if it was worth institutionalizing and whether there were tangible benefits that accrued from it. Use of professional peers, both in selection and in design, and then an ongoing agency commitment to excellence, continuing education, and best practices. So just a bit more about those specific strategies. Quality-based selection, or really qualification-based selection for both the architect engineers that we hire as well as CMs is now our standard practice. We are now in the third round of our requirement contracts, and those, I think, were a signal achievement. Well, I should say that while this initiative was in some ways based on the GSA Design Excellence Initiative, there was one or two key innovations here that I think set this really in a unique place. And that was an ability to move the vast volume of smaller projects while not compromising the quality of the selection process. And that was really the challenge, is how do you get the volume of work out and still give the assignment of each project adequate consideration so that you're matchmaking effectively. And that's really what, in many ways, that's the core function that DDC performs at the outset, which is matching a project, client, and AE together so that it has the best chance of success, given the qualifications of the architects and the nature of the project and so forth. So that was a signal innovation there. Peer participation in selection process, that's also very important. That's something we do routinely. We have outside peers that sit on our selection panels for the big initial RFPs when we hire the groups of 8 or 24 or whatever it is, and when we do two-stage standalone RFPs for the larger projects. So we engage with that with the design professionals at the selection stage. And then we continue to engage peers during design for reviews. Design metric surveys is a kind of an interesting one, and I think it kind of can make the hackles stand up on the backs of architects when they see this, because in fact, while it says design metric, what it really is a consensus building tool that assists and provides a framework for the programming stage, where there's a survey that's facilitated, and through bringing all the stakeholders to the table and everybody sitting together and slogging through this questionnaire, it really helps to solidify the program brief. And then as the design is developed, it's assessed relative to that brief, so which helps to keep the clients honest as well, so that the things don't change as personnel changes and so forth. Client agency design standards. When we hire architects, we want them to be delivering their best and not reinventing the wheel. So every client agency has certain things which are not going to change. There are certain critical adjacencies of function. The way that a rescue station has to operate is not going to change from project to project. It has to do with their training and so on. So those things are embodied in design standards that are unique to each of the client agencies. And we try to free our architects to use their design creativity to solve what is unique about the program and the site, and not what is really set out and is not subject to change. Post-occupancy surveys is something that we routinely do, interviewing end users and trying to feed that back into the design standards and into the brief for upcoming projects. And retro commissioning is something that we're working on now with Department of Citywide Administrative Services, going back into buildings that are currently not performing to standards and retro commissioning the systems, and going into older buildings and really trying to tune them so that they're performing as well as they can. In addition to that, there's an important function I think that the agency provides is a broad-based sort of design, research, and development arm. And we work with our agency partners on many different projects, many of which are centered around sustainability. We have an Office of Sustainable Design that we work with. And here you see the active design guidelines, which many of you I'm sure are going to Fit City 5 tomorrow. And that is one in a series of these Fit City conferences at the Center for Architecture. This is an effort that DDC was involved in with Department of Health and Transportation and City Planning. And then continuing education, which really goes to the institutional entropy phenomenon, which is, I think, endemic with any large government organization, which is over time, things will revert to sort of the shortest distance between 2 points, whatever you want to call it. There's a sort of natural law that tends to chip away at some of the things that we've tried to make happen here in terms of design excellence. So what we try to do is provide coursework for city employees that will help to counter that and work to carry forward the things that have been put into place. A quick snapshot. Over 100 projects have been awarded to our design and construction excellence consultants, and over 1 million square feet of newly constructed or renovated cultural institutions and public libraries, including 5 brand new branches, 300,000 square feet new and renovated public health clinics, and over 3 million square feet of new and renovated public safety facilities. And I have to say that does include the police academy, which is over 1 million of that square footage. So our architects, this is just a listing of the firms that we've worked with in the past and are working with now. And then I think, yeah, these are the projects that have been done and are being done by that group of architects. So these are in various stages of design and construction at this point. And then I was going to just quickly finish by going through some slides of a couple of specific projects that I thought were worth placing in juxtaposition to each other because they represent the range of the portfolio that we're dealing with. The first is the Glen Oaks Branch Library that Marble Fairbanks has designed and is currently in the early stages of construction. And they were solving a site constraint issue through modulating between a very low-scale residential area on the side street and I believe it's Union Turnpike running across the front of the building and sort of weaving those scales together through the facade and dealing with the constraints of a very small footprint, which required them to push the program below grade since there were bulk regulations that prevented the height and operating considerations too. So, and this is also a building I think that embodies much of the active design guidelines in terms of giving primacy to the stair and putting it right out there in the space and so forth. So this is typical of our branch libraries in terms of scale. This is a brand new branch. See a few sections here. And then the next one is the Bronx River Arts Center, which is a Sage and Coombe project, and is the facility is a nonprofit environmental education center in the Bronx. It's located on the Bronx River Greenway, and is being coordinated with the DPR rehabilitation, reclamation of the Bronx River Greenway to an extent. It is a pioneer facility in the neighborhood, and it had a very low budget. So it's an internal gut renovation, but in order to create presence in the neighborhood and really kind of allow this to be a magnet for positive change in that area, the architects developed this graphic-based approach to the exterior, which is very striking and I think will be successful in carrying forward their mission. And then the third project is at the other end of the scale, literally. This is the 911 Call Answering Center, or Public Safety Answering Center, that Skidmore, Owings & Merrill is doing, and Tom Balsley is the landscape architect. This is a facility that has been coming since 2001 and before. It is a fully redundant 911 call answering facility that will work in tandem with the existing facility, and very highly MEP and security driven project. And the challenge, I think, for the design team was to inject some humanity into a very, very tightly packed and environmentally difficult to design for facility. And what you see here is the BIM model showing just the mechanicals in this building. And believe it or not, there is actually space for people in this building. You may not see it here, but it is a very tense, very sort of tightly packed and redundant facility in terms of the mechanical systems. So that challenge was manifest on many scales. Number one, it was it didn't have many windows. And doing something with the facades on this building that would generate some movement and some interest. It's right up by the intersection of the Hutchinson River Parkway and the Pelham Parkway, and there's a lot of high-speed traffic moving past it. And so the architects developed this serrated skin, which changes as you move past it, and then is folded back to create the limited window openings that there are there. And in some ways, it's really an inversion of the approach, the modern approach to window making, where the windows reveal something about what's happening in the program. In this case, in effect, there's a strategy of masking what's happening in the program by where those windows are located and the pattern and so forth. But finding places for people, and at its core, this facility was really about serving a population of folks that have a very, very high stress job. They're taking these 911 calls. They have to be exercising snap judgments that are life and death. And they're, to give them daylight, to give them some place that they can get a breath and step away within the security parameters was very challenging. So I think Tom Balsley and the design team worked very well at creating these opportunities wherever possible, be it at the entry vestibule or in the lobby, where, and this is actually another sort of attribute of the program that I think is worth mentioning. The R&D function that I had mentioned, this is one area where I think we partnered well with the design architects to find opportunities. And this was a coming together of the need to create human scale and some sense of contact with nature within this very cold, high-tech environment, and a sustainability idea. And this was written up in Architect. As you can see, it relies on circulating air through the root system of plants. And this is done, SOM has a relationship with Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and their Center for Architecture, Science and Ecology, right? Yeah. Worked to develop this system, which is being integrated into the lobby, as you can see, and I think does many things for the building. Again, this is just a site plan, and this building is in construction, again, up along the Hutch and the Pelham. This is at the site of the Richard Meyer Bronx Development Center. Also an interesting choice of facade materials. The aluminum skin sort of evokes the earlier Meyer complex there. Okay, I think that's about it. I just wanted to give you a sense of what's ahead. In addition to, I think we've kind of hit the low-hanging fruit with the design initiatives. Things like quality-based selection. We had a partnership with the private sector design community. We had the right time and the right people involved from the city side. I have to give credit to Marla Simpson of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, the mayor himself, and many agency partners that all kind of realized it was the right moment. In 2004 really was an opportunity to make that happen. It's now institutionalized. There's been a rule change in the Procurement Policy Board rules, which makes it the default mechanism, which I think is absolutely key for any innovation like this in the public sector, is again to combat institutional, what do you want to call it, entropy, that's what I call it. You have to institutionalize it by means of rules and laws, and it's the only way it can carry it through multiple administrations. So this was really a landmark achievement. construction is the next frontier. Construction is much more difficult for us to have the same kind of innovative approaches and have it meet with success. We tried a few things a couple of years ago. We tried doing what we're calling defined quantity bidding, where we take the mystery out of the bid process and try to provide clear, quantified bid forms and then make remeasurements, almost like chartered surveying. The industry was not ready for it. It didn't happen. And now we're finally at a point where I think they've come around and we're going to try it again. And now the Subcontractors Trade Association is on board with it, and there's a few key industry partners, and I think we can make it happen. So sometimes it's just about hammering away at what's a good idea until the right time catches up with it. BIM and defined quantity bidding are inextricably linked. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of integrated BIM approaches to construction documentation and sort of contracting that design, bid, build cycle to the extent that we can under state law. And in-use energy audits. This is one of the local laws that was passed recently. We're teaming with DCAS, and we're going to be doing actual in-house in-use energy audits for these facilities. So kind of these are the bookends. We've handled the design process, I think, fairly well. We're quite happy with some of the changes in the selection process and design management. And I think the next frontier is handling some of the early and late stage of project development in a similar way. And one of them, which I didn't mention, the pre-adoption project scoping is key. Part of the challenge in delivering the city's capital program is that the budget cycle and the planning cycle are sort of inverted. And what happens is projects get budgeted before they're properly scoped. And then the scoping process shows that the budgeting was actually not fully informed, and there has to be an adjustment and so on. So trying to get ahead of that by introducing scoping earlier and finding a way of doing it within the capital eligibility guidelines that we have to follow is a challenge, but I think we've actually come up with a way of doing it. And next year, after the July 1 budget, we're hoping that we're going to be engaging with many of you in working with our clients to help them to develop scopes earlier in the process so they can properly budget their projects. And that I think will be a real improvement. So it's early stage planning, hitting the construction phase, and then post-occupancy, ensuring that the buildings in use are actually confirming the design assumptions, whether it be LEED or what have you. So I think that's all I have for you. And this is just closing with, I used to have many slides of projects after this presentation, and I just kind of created this one panoply, and then I believe we're going to have a loop running later during the Q&A. So your projects, many of your projects are here, and many more will be on that loop as we speak. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, David, for walking us through that process. Now we'll turn to Charles and hear about it from the Parks point of view.
We are incredibly lucky to have the Davids at DDC. I have to tell you that the body of work that's come out of that and the framework that they have laid out for all of us has been of great benefit. And as the Parks Department, tonight we have a nice opportunity to recognize some of the designers who've set the course for 21st century park design. And we're going to look at some of the factors that have made that possible. One of them is our fairly generous capital budget. It's now between a little more than $400 million, which is up quite a lot from the $200 million when I started. And this is due primarily to the mayor and most significantly to the Plan NYC projects, major projects that are going to make it possible to have sitting on what's going on. Is it's advancing on its own, or it's my papers. Okay, we're going to scoot back if we can. Forgive me. It's only going forward. It'll only go one direction. The mayor, as I've said, and Commissioner Benepe believe in the importance of public design, and the Design Excellence Program makes great work possible. It's their belief that public architecture and landscape architecture is the most important architecture there is. It's our belief that the work that we do, the public work, should express the highest ideals of government and the aspirations of the people, and we believe that they should solve the problems of this century, not the last. Now, the quality-based procurement system makes that possible. It encourages the design profession to do public work. It levels the playing field so that new firms with less experience can compete. There once was a day when if you didn't have any park experience, you weren't going to do very well in the ratings. And it also does not encourage competition based on the lowest price. We set the fee, you're not bidding against each other. The quality-based procurement system rewards good design and problem solving, and it encourages creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. Our first, during the pilot stage, we had two projects. One was by Toshiko Mori, and she did not deliver a box for the Edgar Allan Poe Visitor Center. It was more like a raven, and it's clad in black slate shingles. And Monty Freeman did deliver a box, but he delivered a box that was textured brick and artful fenestration to properly set off the 59th Street Rec Center. The quality-based procurement system is also good for the department, the Parks Department, because it attracts designers who can look around the corners, who can not settle for the popular understanding. Nancy Owens is one of many who have helped us live up to our 5 design goals. The first is to create delightful, resilient, and sustainable parks. And here at Fort Totten, Nancy expressed the irregular shoreline with these beautiful grasses. The second goal is to respond to the unique attributes of the site, the community, and the microclimate. And at Peck Slip, artist George Tracus worked with Quinnell Rothschild to develop a plan that evoked the shipbuilding that used to occur there, that once poked their noses across the grid of the street. The third goal, is to respond to changing recreational preferences, considering accessibility, culture, and health. And Rogers Marvel and Jan Pokorny converted the 1-season McCarran Pool to a 4-season destination with personal fitness and even ice skating. The fourth goal, to explore new models of architecture and landscape that respond to the problems of this century, is illustrated here by the Bronx River House by Kiss and Cathcart, where a scrim of steel and vine mediate the climate and dramatically express the power of nature. You're interested, I'm sure, in our project assignments. We assign our work based on complexity and the size of the project. Consultants get most of the architecture work, 65%, and we do most of the landscape work in-house, but there's 20% for consultants. Our fifth goal is we are committed to building and nurturing a skilled and committed design profession inside and outside of the department. And I thought you would like to see, by comparison, what some Parks Department work looks like. This is the work of our Bronx team that converted a concrete plant to a park. The work of our Queens Architecture Department, the new comfort station for a gas tank park. Our first LEED Silver building, the Marine Park Senior Center. Our new prototypical comfort station, a blue stone and with passive solar and rain garden, and a riding stable in Staten Island, which is red so it can stand up to its big brother, by the Ocean Breeze track by Sage and Coon. We're going to dig in fairly rapidly into the consultant work we have active consulting contracts that are worth $145 million. That's for engineers, construction supervision, architecture, and landscape. There's 362 active projects. And I'm happy to announce that we have 6 of our 8 new architecture consulting contracts registered. And I think we should take the time to recognize that we have Beyer Blender Bell, Sage & Coombe, 1100 Architects, Leroy Street Studio, Handel Architects, Perkins & Will, and Karen Bausman will be our new architects. And the landscape RFP will be issued in the summer of 2010. You might like this one. I've got you some tips. For those of you who are coming on, we're going to talk about how to make money, how to conserve effort, and remind you we're in it together. And these are worth noting, and if you see me later, I'll give you a printed copy. Make sure you've requested the proper allowances and complexity factors on your fee when you get the contract for each of your projects. Learn the submittal requirements and have someone in your office learn how to submit for payments. And don't work beyond the current level of approval. No matter how sure you are, you'll have it. Ways to save your effort. Get a sign-off on the project scope, the program and its goals. Solve the problems of the site, the goals and the program at the concept level, not the schematic level. And do a schematic level budget. And if you are over budget at that stage, reduce the scope, no matter how painful it is for the client. And take material resistance seriously. If in doubt, hit it with a hammer. Anybody here been victim of our hammer test? Don't bring it to the office. And the other one is hold a design contingency of about 20 to 30% until after the Public Design Commission's approved your project. We're in it together. That means we take resilience seriously. These buildings are unsupervised at night, and things that can break will. And that I need your understanding that any new system needs operations and constructability review, and out-of-the-box thinking needs testing. And the operators are going to need some training. I want to thank the architects and landscape architects who've worked with us over the past 4 years. And we're going to look at some examples of their work. I think many of you are here: Sage & Coombe, BKSK, Rogers Marvel, ARO, Smith Miller, Hawkinson, Kiss Cathcart, Nancy Owens, MKW, Cornell Rothschild, Donna Walcavage, who later became AECOM, and Ballmer became Stantec, Abel Bainson and Butts, Thomas Balsley, and Mark Morrison. This is Kiss Cathcart's Bushwick Inlet Community Center, where the slope of the field goes up over the top of the building. It becomes a playground. These little cutouts. A playground, a community garden that serves a community room, a terrace that serves the people coming up the ramp, and a loggia on the brow that affords a view of the sunset over Manhattan. For Taunton, our project was to convert this compound of apartment buildings to a park. And I showed you an earlier view, but Nancy was quite artistic, preserving the mounds that these buildings were set on. Here's the current conditions, her early drawings expressing the views, opening the views to the sound, and here's what it looks like today. BKSK designed this oval egg of a comfort station for the first playground Fresh Kills, designed by Field Operations. This is Romantic Landscapes by BKW Landscape Architects, and it's Indian Lake in the Bronx. And this is existing conditions at the Malali Park that Donna Walkavage encountered, which she converted into an oasis of gardens and spray play, which is going to be open at night. It will be on those hot summer nights when people used to break into our pool. Now they have a legitimate place to cool down and be well lit and artistic. And all this water runs into these plantings, which should stay verdant during the hot summer. Mark Morrison really brought the green into this poor Edenwald playground and great play value. ARO delivered a striking comfort station for a very bleak John F. Murray Park. And Cornell Rothschild and WXY Architecture removed half of a parking lot to create a dunescape and artistic sunshade for the performances, and this wacky beach towel of a comfort station and pavilion. Tom Balsley made this bold cut through this fairly invasive vegetation to bring you all the way to the sound. I'm sure what happened to those colors, but it's really a tremendous move in a 200-acre park, which is mostly landfill. And he delivered quite artistic playgrounds inspired by the Indian camp, and I don't think they had orange canoes, Tom.
Noted.
You're an artist. And another comfort station by BKSK, where the stone wall that wraps the playground actually is the wall at the comfort station, and there's a clear story of echo resin in a very elegant sliver of a roof. MKW's landscape plan for the Ocean Breeze park that surrounds the Sage and Coombs' track that expands the Blue Belt, and there's the building. It's called Ocean Breeze because it's raised up. Well, the building's called Ocean Breeze because that's the name of the park, but it's perfectly appropriate for the building. It's raised over the parking. It's raised up to catch those ocean breezes, and those glass doors actually open for ventilation. And on the back side, it's bermed to provide an informal place to watch the cross-country runners. And this is the last project we'll look at. It's Sage and Coombs' Owl Hollow Field House. It embraces a fairly large hill. It's clad in this ephemeral screen which expresses feathers. And at night, it's illuminated from within through the translucent walls. So I think I might have a minute left. There are many more projects we could show whose brilliance would not show up in a photograph. But they're pearls of a different sort. They're resilient, sustainable, and professional in their details. And I hope you'll agree that this body of work lives up to our expectations, and that the architects and landscapes architects deserve a round of applause.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Charles, for being so explicit, and for David, too, providing so many details, because that's very much the angle I'd like to pursue in asking you a few questions, and also getting the rest of the panel engaged in questions, that we continue on a very detailed note. And David, starting with you, the DDC legacy is of modest budgets, Byzantine processes, and poor construction, traditionally. On which of these has the Design Excellence program had the most immediate impact in kind of breaking up that reputation for one of those? I mean, has there been...
I would say that, what were the three again? Give me the litany.
Modest budgets,
Byzantine
processes,
yeah.
and poor construction.
Okay, so I think we'll take modest budgets first. I think that the initiative and now this ongoing program has really shown itself to be a success in large part because the budgets have not changed significantly. The budgets still are relatively modest for many of these projects, and I think that the creativity that's been brought to bear is the difference, and I think that this very careful selection and matching of architect to project has created the stage for success in the face of modest budgets. And
What is the budget for the volume of those projects, the cultural projects and the ones that you spoke of that are a big mass? What is the average budget on those?
they range. I would say that if we're talking about substantial addition, renovation type projects, you're probably looking at anywhere from the high 400s to the mid 700s a square foot, depending on program. Obviously, a branch library will have a higher square foot cost than a DEP maintenance facility, for example. But those are the budgets, and to some extent, while they may seem high in some ways, the construction market has, up until the last year, has been overheated to the point of irrationality, as you know. And we had seen prices just going through the roof. And now we're actually seeing much more rationality in the bidding environment, much more competition, and there's a number of reasons for that we can talk about. But
how do you, for both you and Charles, how do you handle kind of budget overruns, or when you're working with architects and you see them go over budget, or at what point do you catch that, or try to redirect them, or do you were trying to give some helpful tips, Charles, about that, but I wonder, when does it happen and what do you do about it?
Yeah, I think to some extent this is a product also of the disjuncture between the budgeting and the scoping process that I mentioned earlier, and we do have a situation where certainly in the recent past there have been adjustments that have had to happen because the actual scope and program have never been aligned with the budget that was put in place. So the early part of design really kind of merges back into a programming phase, so that adjustment always happens. I think we try to catch it as early as possible. People need to estimate realistically, and the agency needs to weigh in on some of the escalation and contingency numbers given public sector construction realities. And that's also a learning experience, I think, for some of the firms that may not have done public work is, what is your total bottom line cost in relation to the hard trade cost? That can be a factor of 50%. You wind up taking your trade costs and adding another 50% to get yourself to where you need to be. And sometimes what happens is everyone kind of kids themselves and looks at the trade costs and aligns that to the budget. And in fact, at a certain point, those two things need to be brought into alignment.
Charles, did you have a thought about that?
Well, I could talk, but I think it might be good for us to ask Jennifer, because as the architect of that huge building, we had a number of factors. One is that nobody really knows what it costs to drive pilings in, really terrible soil. And they're really, sometimes there are really big elements that you just can't estimate. And then the other issue is that sometimes when there's a budget downturn, the budget for the building changes. And that requires us to not only do the very best we can with the building, but it also means that we might have to change the scope.
How often does that happen?
Well, the budget fluctuations, we're all vulnerable to it, and they could occur, every 3 or 4 years, depending on how the economy is going. But
I think we did an article at the Architects newspaper showing that about 178 architects enlisted for the 07 round, and that went up 30% to 237 in 07. And certainly with the downturn, I'm sure it's been incrementally larger. What do you do to kind of, there are quite a few firms for whom, and I think Marble Fairbanks is one for whom 30% and up of their work consists of public work, and then there are people like SOM who don't really need it at all. And I wonder how you kind of juggle those demands of excellence, and also firms who really do this work, do it well, know it well, and bringing in new blood? I mean, how do you juggle all that?
It's a relatively complicated calculus, and I think that when every one of our solicitations that we've done, we finished the third one now, we have our third set of contracts in place, has had a slightly different flavor. And I think that this time was the most competitive, hands down. There's no doubt about it. And the economy played a huge role in that.
How many?
I think it was 200, over 200. Faith, you remember? Where's Faith? Yeah, anyway, it was over 200, significantly. And that combined with the fact that we had already done 2 other sets of these contracts, all kind of came together and informed the process. And I think, when we do these selections, there's 7 people on the panel, including an outside peer, and we try to kind of represent every piece of the agency's operating, model. And I think the prime consideration is always going to be initially the portfolio. What does the built work show us? And it's always going to be, particularly in a hyper-competitive environment, built work is very, very important. So many firms have gorgeous renderings of unbuilt projects that the selection process, does start to become, significantly tilted toward built work with the increased competition. And I think, while we expressly did not want these RFPs to be perpetuating a public work kind of, stable of architects that do tons of public work, we have tried to establish a mix. And I think that mix goes, some firms that do a lot of public work, some that have not done any public work, bringing in every time new firms so that it's not, and this is counter to what our clients want a lot of times. They would like to use the same firm over and over again because they feel that their learning curve is, amortized, and they can just kind of set right to work and people know what to expect. And we've worked hard to try to counter that. So there's a mix of new firms, old firms, and some that have done a lot of public work and some that have not. And we try to balance that out so that our work winds up, we have something for everybody, that we find the right match for every project, and we have enough diversity in the group of architects that we've given contracts to that we will always find a good match.
Is there a tenure that you can't, or is there, you can't be on the list more than 3 times in a row or something like that, or is it, you kind of feel
It's
it
not,
way?
no, it's not that. One thing I didn't mention, I think, Charles, I think you had this on one of your slides, but there was a very conscious effort to bring small firms in to do business with the city, and particularly for that high volume of small projects. And we found that in most cases, we got the best result when we could use a smaller firm on those smaller projects. And so we did have a set-aside, which was these groups of 24 or 20 contracts that were specifically targeted to the small firms. And I think that's been an important part of the initiative as well, making sure that we did that. And then obviously what comes with that is the need to acknowledge that they're much more vulnerable and less liquid than the bigger firms, and so it puts an increased responsibility on the agency to not put them out of business once we've hired them. Which gets to your Byzantine bureaucracy.
Could I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
Because I think it's useful to say, having just gone through I can tell you what the sad thing is that you can't re-award to people who have served you well. And we know that some of our firms have made really big efforts to serve us well, and that the selection process gives them no advantage. And that is because part of our goal is to provide opportunities for people who have not done city work before, even though that's more work for everybody. And that means it's more work educating them, et cetera, et cetera. And then just a couple tips. If you're thinking of responding to the next RFP for landscape architecture, a couple of things that help is work that's comparable, say budget a lot, say schedule, say budget and schedule and budget and schedule, and bring your whole team to the interview. And while they are there, call upon them and give them some meaningful something to say about the presentation. They're not just there to say they're on your team. And so I want all of the landscape architects to remember that as well, because it makes an impression. You see if people have worked together before, you see if there's some rapport, you see if they turn to each other and ask questions. It really makes an impression. Say budget.
Schedule. Okay, we'll stay on schedule here. Scott, what about that steep learning curve? Can you talk a little bit to that idea of how tough it was in the beginning and how easy it got the second time, or didn't get easy, or?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think that we did when we first got on the list, we knew, you know, the process was very different than anything we had done. And we had this idea that we would actually talk to some of the architects that had actually worked for DDC before. And then we actually said, you know what, let's not do that, because we sort of wanted to go into it without any preconceptions about the process and just sort of, you know, go in very optimistic, just saying, okay, we're going to do what we do. We're not going to try to change the way that our office runs. We're not going to change the way that we design, change any of our strategies, and just see, you know, how it worked out. And that's really kind of been our approach the whole way. I mean, we don't really try to differentiate between the way we approach a public project versus a private sector project. There's clearly differences, there's clearly bureaucracies, but we find, you know, any client has issues, so they're just different issues. So, you know, certain things were difficult to figure out. The invoicing was, you know, very complicated, but you know, you do figure it out, and you kind of, you know, work out all the idiosyncrasies, and you know, it becomes a way of, just a different way to do an invoice. But you know, we didn't find it that difficult. It was easier definitely the second time, but you know, I think we picked it up pretty quickly. We feel like we did have a lot of support, though. That was actually quite nice. There was a lot of support at the beginning, so we didn't, you know, we didn't go down the wrong road too much. We kind of stayed on track.
And Tom, how about in the landscape, working in with parks? Was it a steep learning curve? And you've done it for quite a few years before.
Well, not as long as my hair would indicate, but long enough before that that we were a little bit familiar, more familiar maybe than some of the other firms were with what to expect. Although we were not really sure what to expect with a design excellence program, and obviously we're pleasantly surprised with that. But we understood enough about budget and schedule and budget. We had learned that earlier. And we also understood to work within the system. I think David and Charles both alluded to that it's very important that you bring whatever creativity you can muster up to the project, but you have to be very respectful of a certain set conditions and design around those. And I think we also had a little bit of experience with having done that, although we didn't have as much artistic freedom in the past, and that's really, or design support. I think that's really what the design excellence program brought to us. And it's allowed us to really flourish, and I think hopefully bring more to the Parks Department and the city as a whole.
And Charles, Charles mentioned the number that were in-house and the number that were consultants. And how about for design excellence? How does that break down for DDC?
Well, we're a little bit different from Parks in that we do not have an in-house design program. We, for the structures division at least, for the public buildings, all of our work, 100%, is designed by private consultants. I don't want to ignore the other half of our portfolio, though, which is the infrastructure side, and for that it flips, and almost 100% of that is designed in-house, with the exception of things like the plazas, which are now going to the design excellence firms, and I think, Tom, you're involved in one of those now. So for public buildings, it's all out to the private community.
That's pretty unique. I mean, I now realize that California does it in a totally different way, and how unusual is it to have this set up compared to other cities?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I come from, my history is that I've worked for an agency that had a very robust in-house design group at the Housing Authority, and for a while the community center program there was really thriving, and I think produced some great buildings. But it's tremendously resource intensive on the agency side to do that, and fielding design teams to handle large complex projects goes beyond what our resources are able to produce for the volume that we have. So it's really a product, number one, of just pure resource availability, and number two, I think that, Charles, forgive me, but I think from my experience at any rate, government works best as a program manager, bringing together the best of the private sector and partnering with them for complex buildings. I think that the way that buildings are delivered now is a raft of consultants and sub-consultants, and as a public owner, we tend to work best when we have an outsourced design architect that can be the leader of that group of sub-consultants and disciplines, and we work specifically with what we can do, which is to clear the way. And I just had made a couple of notes myself that I didn't mention, but I have a little note that says the best results happen when DDC makes a good match and then gets out of the way. And I think that really is true in a number of ways. And I think that our role is to almost be the blocker. We set up the match when we're a marriage counselor, when we need to be. If things go bad with the client and the architect, we try to help straighten that out. But it's a light touch. And I think the lighter the touch, the better it is. I think the most important thing we can do is make the good match. And once that good match is made, let the folks that are the designers design the project, and we get out in front and try to clear obstacles and let it happen.
We probably have the largest landscape architecture design practice in New York City, if not the country. And our designers know our clients, and they can do very creative work. And they can do very creative work with not a lot of budget, and they are tuned into understanding the social and cultural forces that we're going to draw our design inspiration from. And these projects tend to be fairly small. So, and we have a lot of them. And there are many of them probably the kinds of projects that an architecture or landscape architecture firm wouldn't make much money on. And I have to say that the talent that we have in the department does an excellent job with not a lot of money on a fairly short turnaround. Oh, you didn't like my answer. On a fairly short turnaround. And that we rely on our consultants to do the larger and more complex projects, which is not the most skilled part of our repertoire.
Jennifer, you've worked for both. How would you, in terms of processes and kind of, the learning curve, how would you compare working with the two departments?
Well, they're very different, but as Scott actually said, there's a learning curve with any client, and in that sense, working with Parks or DDC isn't that different from meeting any new client and starting out and figuring it out. In fact, the one advantage to being in the system is that you learn on the first project and you're a little bit more sophisticated on the second, and on and on. I would say that DDC has a much more articulated system for how the project progresses. They have the design consultant guidelines, and all of that is written down and there for you to read. Parks is much more actively collaborative, and maybe it's also because as architects, we are not typically used to dealing with all that land, and so we we learned a lot about interfacing with the landscape around. So, and it is very different, but, you know, you figure it out, obviously.
Before opening to the audience, I have just two more questions. And one, Charles, what would you say about the conservative or innovative taste of people selecting for parks? I mean, how adventuresome can the architecture be? I know in the past you've sometimes talked about it not being a place for a real experiment. But what would you say in terms of you know, taste level or style level for that matter?
Well, we have many different communities, and we try to be respectful of the context that we're working within. And so as you can be creative as long as you're understanding what that cultural and social context is. And then as far as the department goes, we want that hammer test. You know, you can be artistic, but it has to be resilient. And, you know, I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings, but, you know, we really want that not to break. And we know that it will, and you have to be respectful of the fact that most of our park managers are on an absolutely starvation budget, and they won't be able to put it back. So we want creativity, and we want resilience, and those are the, you know, that's the framework that we work within.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask one question for each of you, starting with David, to all answer, and then we'll open to the floor. But finish this sentence. Design excellence would work so much better if...
Okay.
Fabulous though it is, being the first part, of course.
Boy, I think it would work so much better if the budgets were properly aligned with the scope before we get the project and not afterwards. That, to me, has been one of the biggest obstacles because we spend so much time battling with the budget office after projects have gone into the capital budget. And I think if we could get ahead of that and we could properly budget, even if we have fewer projects, but they're adequately budgeted, things would go much more smoothly, and it would make all of your jobs much easier because you would really be designing to a program and having a budget that's aligned with it rather than going all the way through schematic design and realizing that there's a disjuncture. That's the biggest one.
Thank you.
I know the answer to this one, and it's not what you're going to expect. I think for the Parks Department, it would work better if we had a more articulated process like DDC. And I know that we are working to improve the promptness of our payments, and we are working to improve communication, and we're working to improve consultant orientation.
I think what David said rings true for our experience, which is that program and budget are not always aligned, and that would certainly help, even though everybody on the team is prepared to deal with that issue. I would add one other component, which is that sometimes the DDC projects have this pre-design phase, and whether it's focused on budget or program, I think all of these projects could benefit from that vetting of the sort of, has the client agency or the user group really understood what is being outlined for this project? Because sometimes when you get into it, you learn that they don't understand what you're doing for them. So.
Well, I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit and suggest that I think the Design Excellence Program with respect to parks could be improved if the designers had more contact with the end users, the borough commissioners, maintenance and operations. Not necessarily people we get up in the morning to and are anxious to spend the day with, but because the message is usually, we can't do this, we can't do this. But on the other hand, I think it would reduce a lot of the frustration and put us on a beeline to a solution that really is a happy ground for everyone. And I think I think it's just a matter of improving these procedures, but I think ultimately we as designers, we don't find the resistance necessarily with Charles or at that level. It's really at the borough level, and not that they necessarily don't want to advocate design. I think they just need a little bit of education as well as persuasion.
I sort of have two answers. I mean, I think this is sort of the obvious one, and I know that David thinks this too, is that it carries into construction. I mean, I think what we're finding in the construction phase, we haven't carried a project all the way through, but the construction is very challenging from the architect's perspective, because I think in some ways our role becomes very marginalized, which kind of segues into the next thing, which I think would make a huge difference, is just if there was more of a kind of infrastructural setup of more collaboration and not so much kind of adversarial relationships. Because as an architect, I want to work with, and I want to talk to contractors and fabricators and people that are actually going to be doing the work, but it's just impossible to do within the structure, the kind of construction procurement structure right now. It's just impossible to do that. And I think that would make a huge difference in the quality of the work. It would probably help in terms of the budgets. And it would actually, I think, it would attract even, I think, more architects and probably more contractors to the program.
Thank you, everyone, for being so articulate. That was great. And so I want to open it to the audience to